This recipe is non-alcoholic fruit cake. This recipe is divided into a few steps. The first step is to soak these dried fruits in some fruit juice. I have got the measurements written in my description box below, as well as on the screen it will appear. Here I've got some mixed fruit. Here I've got a mix of orange and lemon peel, green glazed cherries, red glazed cherries. Here I've got some cranberries, some apricot, figs, some dry mango slices, prunes, and some sweetened pineapple, plus some honey dates, as well as golden raisins. Now what I'll be doing is I will be chopping these dry fruits into a little smaller pieces for the cake, and I will be soaking this in orange juice. You can see the orange juice along with some apple juice. So it will be a combination of apple and orange juice, and I will be also using some honey while soaking these fruits. So let's start chopping. I'll start with chopping the apricots. Now it's up to you how big or small you want to chop them, and how you want them to be in your cake. I've also washed some of these dry fruits like this apricot, dates, figs, and then I pat dried them with kitchen paper towel. I've chopped these dried fruits. Now what I'll do next is I will place them in a clean mason jar and add orange juice, apple juice, and some honey, and keep it in my fridge for at least 2 days before using it with my cake batter. So let's start mixing. I've got this huge mason jar, and it's got a wide mouth which I like, and it's clean, sterilized. So to this mason jar I will be adding all my dried fruits. So I'm going to start by adding my mixed fruit. It doesn't matter in what order you add your fruit to the jar. After adding all the dry fruits in this mason jar, I will be adding equal quantity of apple and orange juice to soak this dry fruits. I'll measure the quantity of the juices equally. So here I'm going to add in 2 cups of orange juice in one of the measuring cups, and I'll be adding 2 cups of apple juice. Now I'll just pour in both the juices together, combine them, give it a good stir. Now you don't need to do it here, you can just directly pour these juices in this mason jar. Give it a good stir and make sure that all the dried fruits are soaked well in this combination of juices. Now you can see they're soaked amazingly well. Now I'll add in my honey. I'm adding in honey because what happens is as the days pass by, when we are soaking these fruits in this juices, the juices might turn bitter, and to avoid that problem I will be adding some honey. So for each cup of juice I will be using a tablespoon of honey. Give it a good stir. Now what we need to do is we need to cover this and place it in our fridge for at least 2 days, and every day just open the lid and give it a good stir and see that the fruits are still immersed in the fruit juice. Cover this and keep it in my fridge for a good 2 days. So you can see all the dried fruits are soaking in this combination of juices. It's been exactly 2 days since these fruits have been soaking in the combination of apple orange juice with honey. And now what I'll do is I will remove dried fruits from this liquid, and what I want to do is I want to strain the liquid off from these dry fruits before using it in my cake batter. So I measured my dry fruits and I put it in the strainer here, and I have kept these fruits in the strainer for at least 45 minutes till all the juices from this comes out. So all this juice has come out from the soaked fruits, and I will not be using the juice for my cake batter. I will only be using these dried fruits for my cake batter. The fruit cake, you can also call it a plum cake. I call it a plum cake because I have used prunes in this recipe, and prunes are basically dried plums. And this is similar to a Christmas cake as well. The only difference is in a Christmas cake you top it with royal icing or you cover it with fondant, which I will not be doing in this recipe. So I'm just making a simple fruit cake. Here I've got 3 cups of soaked dried fruits. Here I've got 350 grams of all-purpose flour, 350 grams of sugar, 1 teaspoon baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, quarter teaspoon of cinnamon powder, quarter teaspoon of ginger powder, and I will be using quarter teaspoon of nutmeg. Here I've got a combination of nuts. This is in total of 100 grams. I've just chopped them. Here I've got pistachios 25 grams, cashews 25 grams, walnut 25 grams, and almonds 25 grams. I will also be using 3 large eggs. These are at room temperature. Always make sure when you're baking a cake, any cake, you should always have your eggs at room temperature. Here I've got 125 grams of melted butter and 100 ml of oil. This is vegetable oil. It's flavorless. Make sure you do not have any flavorful vegetable oil. Here I've got half cup of sugar. This half cup of sugar I will be using to make a caramel syrup for this recipe. Now if you have vanilla essence, you can go ahead and use vanilla essence, 2 teaspoons of vanilla essence. I will be using vanilla sugar here for this recipe. It's about 9 grams, approximately 2 teaspoons. So my first step is to make a caramel syrup for my cake batter. Once I do that, then I will put my oven for preheating. Let's start making the caramel sauce. I've just turned my stove on low to medium, and I'll add my half cup of sugar. I will wait till the sugar melts, and I will also be adding a little water, around a tablespoon of water. After adding the water, I let the sugar be and I'll wait for it to melt. You can see the sugar has melted to a light golden brown, and now what I'll do is I will turn my stove off and add quarter cup of hot water. So I've turned my stove off. I'm going to add quarter cup of hot water. When you're adding hot water, please be careful because the water splashes. And at this time, while the water is bubbling, carefully add in butter. I'm adding 4 tablespoons of melted butter. This is from the 125 grams of butter. I'm not adding any extra butter beyond 125 grams that I have. And I haven't used a spoon throughout, and I just give it a quick stir like this. Turn the stove on and just boil it for less than a minute. And this is my caramel syrup, which is ready to use for my batter. I will wait for this to completely cool down before using it. And now I'll just turn my stove off. I don't want to boil it any further because once you cool this caramel syrup down, the color will start turning a bit darker. So what I'll do is I'll keep it aside and let it cool. Let's start working on our cake batter. So first I will sift the all-purpose flour. I'm doing that so that there are no lumps formed in my dough. So I'll just sift it along with all the dry ingredients. I will be adding my baking powder, baking soda, and later on I'll add the spice mix. Just let's sift all this together. I will be using 2 tablespoons of this all-purpose flour for my soaked dry fruits. If you add this all-purpose flour to the soaked dry fruit, what it does is it prevents the dry fruits from sinking in the batter. So I will dust this over the dried fruits. To the sifted flour, I will add in the ginger powder and cinnamon powder, as well as grate some fresh nutmeg. And this is dry ingredients. That's my oven beeping, and I have preheated my oven at 320 degrees Fahrenheit or 160 degrees Celsius. We will be slow baking this cake, so always bake a fruit cake on low baking temperatures, because we are adding nuts to this recipe as well as fruits, and you don't want the nuts and the dried fruits to burn if you bake it at a high temperature. So now our next step is to prepare the wet ingredients. So I saved about 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour from my 350 grams flour. So I'm just dusting it over. I just want to coat the dry fruits all over. Just leave it like this, and then I will use it in my cake recipe. So just with gentle hands, try to mix everything. Do not add more flour to this recipe. If you think 2 tablespoons is not enough to dust over this soaked dried fruits, you can even remove 4 tablespoons from the 350 grams of all-purpose flour of this recipe. Now I'll keep this aside. For preparing the wet ingredients, to a mixing bowl, add sugar, add oil, add melted butter, and start whisking it with a paddle attachment. Now I'll add in the eggs. Now I will be adding the cooled caramel syrup to this mixture, and I will pour the caramel syrup. Remember, the caramel syrup has to cool down completely. If it's hot, it will cook the eggs in this batter, and you don't want that happening. After pouring the caramel syrup, we will whip this again for at least a minute. Now I will add in the all-purpose flour slowly while it's mixing. Just add in a spoon at a time. Just scrape the sides out. Now the reason I'm using oil in this recipe is because the fruit cake is generally dry and dense. So what the oil does is it adds a bit of moisture to this cake, and once this cake is baked, I will be making simple syrup. Simple syrup is just a sugar syrup which we make with equal quantity of water with equal quantity of sugar. So once this cake comes out hot from the oven, I'll just spray some simple syrup over the top of this cake, and then once the cake is 100% or completely cooled down, then I will poke some holes in this cake, and I will feed the cake some simple syrup which will keep my cake moist and wet. So this will prevent the cake from becoming dense and dry. Now I will add in my dry fruits. Give it a good mix. Just mix it for around 30 seconds. Now I'll add in the soaked dry fruits. I'll just mix it until it's combined. Don't over mix it. This batter is ready to be poured into the baking tin. Now I will show you how to prepare this baking tin for my fruit cake. So here I've got a spring foam pan, by which I mean is I can separate the base from the top of the pan, and this is 10 by 10 inch square pan which has a depth of around 2.5 inches. So in a fruit cake, because the fruit cake is baked at very low temperature and very slow, we need to make sure to secure our cake from burning or overcooking very quickly while baking it. So here what we need to do is we need to build an outer wall around this pan as well as an inner wall, so that when you bake it, the heat slowly gets into the pan while it's baking. I have cut a total of 6 sheets of square paper, placing 4 on the base of the tin, and I will be placing 2 additional papers over the top of my cake batter before baking it. Also, the height of the inner wall and outer wall of this tin is 5 inches. Since the depth of my tin is 2.5 inches, I'm just doubling the height and hence I got 5 inches. This baking tin is ready for the cake batter. Pour the batter in the prepared cake tin. If your cake batter is extra for your cake tin, you can always keep the extra batter and bake it into cupcakes. Now that the cake is even, I cut the parchment paper with a hole on top. So this is what I will place over this cake. This will prevent my cake from browning very quick on the top. So just spread it. You can see it will bake well, and I'm using 2 of these sheets. And now our cake is absolutely ready to place it in the oven for baking. So first I'll bake for 1 hour at 160 Celsius, 320 Fahrenheit, and then I will decrease the temperature after that and bake it till it's done. So let's start baking. To make simple syrup, here I've got half cup of sugar and half cup of room temperature water, and I will be using probably a tablespoon of lemon juice. So what this simple syrup does is it keeps the cake moist. So once my cake is baked, over the hot cake I'll just spray some simple syrup, and then I will let the cake cool down completely. I'll make some holes in the cake, and then I will feed the cake with this simple syrup, and this is how your cake is kept moist. Using simple syrup, we need a spray bottle. So here I've just got some mineral water bottle, which I will be pouring my prepared simple syrup. Now I've got the lid, and to make this bottle work as a spray bottle, I'm just going to poke some holes in the top of this lid. Now I've just made these holes, you can see. To the saucepan I will be adding sugar as well as my room temperature water. It's equal quantity of sugar to equal quantity of water. Now I will turn my stove on. I let this sugar melt with the water or dissolve with the water, and then I'll add my lemon juice, which will stop the sugar in the syrup from crystallizing. Sugar has dissolved in the water. Now I'll turn the stove off, and at this point of time I will be adding a tablespoon of lemon juice. Wait for the sugar syrup to cool down. I'm just giving it a good stir without a spoon. Simple syrup has cooled down. Now I'll pour this in my bottle. This simple syrup is ready to use. You can keep this simple syrup over your countertop or even in the fridge. I've just removed this cake from the oven, and I'll see if the cake is done by using a toothpick through my cake, and you can see it's come out clean. This means my cake is baked completely. Now be careful, this is very hot, so while removing the paper you have to be very careful. Now what I'll do is I'll just poke a few holes through this cake, and I will not unmold it because it's really very hot. So I baked this first for 1 hour at 160 degrees Celsius, or you can say to 320 Fahrenheit. Then after exactly an hour I decreased my oven temperature to 140 degrees Celsius or 280 degrees Fahrenheit, and I baked it for a further 1 hour, but you can even bake it for probably less than an hour in the second round. So in total my baking time is 2 hours, but every oven temperature is different. Every oven is different. It might take you 1.5 hours, it might take you 2 hours, it might take you 2 hours 15 minutes, just depends on the doneness of the cake. So I will be pouring the simple syrup over my hot cake to keep my hot cake moist. When you have hot cakes, you should not unmold them immediately. Once it's cooling down, also what I like to do is I like to cover it again. And what I like doing is I like also covering it with a cloth. So what happens is the steam is retained within the cake, and once I unmold it, it should be a little soft and spongy. So once it's cooled down, then I'll again spray more simple syrup. So after half an hour, I'll be back. It's been exactly half an hour. Now I'll just remove this cloth and I will try to unmold this cake. Cut the string. I'll poke some holes here too. I'll just pour some simple syrup over it. Now I'll cut into the cake to show you how it's baked from within. You can see how beautifully it's cooked through and through. It's soft and spongy. This cake is usually a dark colored cake. That's why when we were cooking the caramel syrup, I kept the color light, because eventually when you bake cake with dark dried fruits, the cake does become darker. And this is an amazing, delicious cake, and you can most certainly enjoy it any time of the year. So please like, share and subscribe to my channel. Please click on the bell icon for notification of my latest videos, and thank you for watching. Enjoy!